For as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one, the forgotten one, the family ATM, the scapegoat who kept the peace, but never got a seat at the table. I'm Rebecca Jackson, 38 years old, a corporate lawyer specializing in contract law. By day, I draft airtight agreements and dissect legal jargon. By night, I'm the unpaid accountant, the emotional referee, and the silent supporter of my family's endless dramas. Last month, I shelled out $25,000 to cover last-minute expenses for my mother's 60th anniversary party, caterers who demanded immediate payment, last-minute venue fees, and a new floral arrangement because the original wilted in the heat. I thought it was just another family investment, an unspoken duty. But instead of gratitude, my Aunt Bridget shot me a glare and muttered loud enough for me to hear. Too stingy, really. Not family enough to understand how these things work. The words sliced through me sharper than any knife. How could someone so deeply dependent on me be so cruel? Bridget Morris is a constant shadow over every family gathering, always there with a sharp criticism or a pointed remark. Yet she's the one who leeches off my generosity, making sure her son David stays the golden boy who inherits everything. I've always kept quiet, masking my ache behind polite smiles and measured responses. But the truth is, the family business, the empire I was supposed to inherit, was never mine. I know the contracts, the legal intricacies, every loophole, every clause. That knowledge is my secret power, though I've never revealed it. I'm trapped in this web of loyalty and betrayal, tired, but not broken. Something feels off, like a slow-burning fire beneath the surface. I'm starting to see the cracks in the perfect family facade, and I'm beginning to wonder if I've been blind to a truth too painful to face. The memory hits me like a cold wave. The Christmas when I was 8, standing in the Grand Jackson Estates living room, watching as Michael, my younger brother, gleamed with excitement behind the wheel of his brand new car. The house buzzed with laughter and holiday cheer, but all I received was a stiff thank you card from my mother for babysitting my cousins yet again. Later that night, I overheard Bridget leaning close to my mother, whispering with a cruel edge, "Rebecca's father was never really part of the company. That's why she'll never inherit." Those words clung to me like a shadow, repeated silently in the background of every family gathering. I tried to believe it was protection, a twisted kind of love meant to shield me from corporate politics I was too young to understand. But the unfairness was undeniable. Michael was the golden child, the heir apparent, groomed and praised, while I was the helper, the invisible one who gave tirelessly, but was always dismissed. As I grew older, the pattern only deepened. I became the family's safety net, both financially and emotionally, while my contributions were overlooked. I remember my teenage self, staring at the family photo wall, questioning my place. Why was I always the one to sacrifice? Why was my worth measured by what I could give rather than who I was? Confusion gave way to resentment, a quiet storm brewing beneath my polite exterior. I swallowed my anger, told myself I was doing the right thing, keeping the family together, playing the role assigned to me. But inside, I was unraveling, caught between love and betrayal in a house built on lies. Adulthood didn't bring relief. It only multiplied the burden. Over 5 years, I loaned the family business a staggering $150,000 to cover payroll and vendor debts when David's reckless spending spiraled out of control. I worked nights and weekends, drafting contracts to save them from legal disasters, never asking for a dime. Yet David and Bridget treated my efforts as mere expectations. I remember their voices dripping with entitlement. "You're not doing enough. That's your job, isn't it?" It stung, but I kept going. Then there's James Bennett, my fiancé, a seasoned corporate attorney who sees through the charade. He admires my quiet strength and offers counsel whenever I need it. Years ago, I confided in him about the forged document I discovered, evidence that erased my claim to the family business. It's a secret I carry like a weight, knowing my legal expertise could expose the truth, but fearing the fallout. The family dynamics are tangled. Michael, the favored brother, oblivious to the full extent of deceit. Sarah, my mother, who manipulates emotions to maintain the status quo. Bridget, the parasitic aunt. And David, the entitled cousin basking in the stolen legacy. It's a toxic cocktail, and I'm trapped in its center. The baby shower was supposed to be a celebration, a joyful gathering for Michael's pregnant wife. I arrived with a $10,000 gift and my usual warm smile, hoping to blend in, to support. But Bridget seized the microphone with a sly grin and launched into a speech laced with venomous undertones about family legacies and those truly connected to our success. The message was clear. I was an outsider. Laughter and knowing nods rippled through the room. I caught David's smirk as he whispered to those nearby, "Rebecca's not really one of us." The humiliation burned hot, and I felt every eye linger on me, pity and mockery mingling. James stood beside me, jaw clenched, a silent pillar of support. I plastered on a polite smile, swallowing the lump in my throat. Later, confiding in James, I whispered, "I'm done being invisible." I told myself Bridget's cruelty was just a defense mechanism, a mask for her own insecurities. But the seed of doubt had been planted deep inside me. I wasn't sure what I was going to do next, but I knew I couldn't stay silent much longer. The family dynamic had shifted, and I felt the first stirrings of a long overdue reckoning. The moment I dared to step forward, to question the twisted narrative spun around me, the backlash was swift and merciless. It was as if I'd poked a hornet's nest, and suddenly, the air was thick with whispers, glances, and side comments that stung sharper than any outright insult. Bridget, with her practiced smile and cold eyes, wasted no time. She painted me as the family's greedy black sheep, the money-hungry outsider who cared only about dollars and power. Her words slithered through the family grapevine, infecting distant relatives and old family friends. They became flying monkeys, little agents of doubt and disdain, delivering snippets of gossip like poisoned arrows. I overheard hushed conversations at family gatherings where my name was twisted and tarnished, each retelling more damaging than the last. What hurt most was the subtlety of it all. The way Sarah, my own mother, started to echo Bridget's critiques, cloaked in concern, as if I was the problem child, the one who didn't understand the family's needs. I remember the sharp pang in my chest during a quiet moment when Sarah's eyes barely met mine. Her voice soft but cutting. "Rebecca, maybe you're being a little selfish. We just want what's best for the family." The cruel irony was suffocating. She was the one who'd silently supported this betrayal for years. Bridget fed the board false stories, suggesting I mishandled funds or was reckless with loans, painting me as a threat to the family business's stability. When I confronted members of the board, I was met with blank stares and dismissive shrugs, as if I was imagining things, or worse, making trouble where none existed. The gaslighting was relentless. My memories doubted, my intentions questioned, my voice drowned in a chorus of denial. The isolation crept in like a slow, cold tide. Invitations dwindled, calls went unanswered, and faces once warm turned distant. Yet beneath the surface of my quiet suffering, a new resolve began to burn. The family's efforts to bury me only fueled the fire inside me. I was no longer willing to be the invisible caretaker, the scapegoat, the forgotten daughter. But I knew that this fight would demand more than whispered protests and private confrontations. Bridget's army was strong and the battlefield was set. I clenched my fists and whispered to myself, "I'm still here, and I'm not done." The road ahead was uncertain, but my silence had finally broken. Determined to bridge the widening chasm, I sought a peaceful resolution, not out of weakness, but because I still believed in the family's potential for fairness. I arranged a mediated meeting, hoping that facts and reason could cut through the fog of deceit. The room was cold and sterile, lined with leather chairs and polished wood, a stark contrast to the heated undercurrents beneath the surface. I laid out my case with quiet precision, detailed records of the $150,000 I'd loaned to the business, copies of contracts I'd drafted, logs of hours spent untangling legal knots. I spoke calmly, hoping the weight of evidence would sway the tide. But Bridget was ready, wielding emotional barbs like weapons. She painted me as a divisive force, accusing me of lacking family spirit, of trying to tear apart what little unity remained. Sarah chimed in, her voice steady and cold, framing my claims as selfish disruptions to the family's harmony. The mediator listened, but the scales were tipped long before I walked in. My facts were dismissed as unsubstantiated, my contributions minimized. The room felt like a trap, the walls closing in as my words bounced off hardened armor. I left that meeting with a heavy heart, the sting of rejection sharper than any open wound. My attempt at peace had been twisted into another tool used against me, deepening the chasm between me and those I once called family. The quiet hope I'd clung to cracked under the weight of betrayal. The realization settled in. Peace was a fragile illusion here. Yet beneath the despair, a flicker of defiance ignited. If reason wouldn't reach them, then perhaps I'd need to find another way to be heard. The next blow came with brutal clarity at Michael's 40th birthday party. A dazzling event, the kind of celebration that should have been a joyful reunion, but instead marked another crushing humiliation. I arrived cautiously, hopeful for a semblance of normalcy. But the invitation that mattered most, the family business's shareholders' meeting, was a glaring omission. I wasn't just left out, I was erased. The snub was public, happening right under the noses of family and business associates alike. I caught Bridget's smug smile as she whispered to nearby guests, "Rebecca has no stake, no say here." David's voice rang out with cruel certainty, announcing plans to expand the company without distractions, his gaze never meeting mine. It was a calculated message. I was invisible, irrelevant. The sting was immediate and deep. My chest tightened, breath shallow as I navigated the room, sensing the avoidance in every turned head and dropped gaze. Business contacts who once valued my input now questioned my involvement, whispers swirling about my supposed lack of influence and legitimacy. The financial support I'd given, the hours I'd sacrificed, dismissed as inconsequential. In that moment, my professional reputation felt as shattered as my confidence. It wasn't just about being excluded from a meeting. It was about being stripped of identity, of the place I'd fought so hard to secure. The cruelty was precise, engineered to isolate and humiliate. The party's lights and laughter felt like a mockery, a stark contrast to the cold reality settling over me. I held back tears, swallowed the lump in my throat, and vowed silently that this injustice wouldn't define me. The last thread of hope I clung to unraveled with one letter. I poured my heart onto paper, crafting a plea for acknowledgement, respect, and rightful inclusion in the family business. I begged for a private meeting with Bridget and Sarah, a chance to mend what was broken. When Bridget read the letter, her disdain was palpable even over the phone. Calling me naive and selfish, she refused to meet or negotiate, shutting the door on any possibility of dialogue. Sarah's response was colder still, a curt text stating the family has moved on, a phrase that echoed like a death knell for any hopes of reconciliation. The rejection was absolute, a final line drawn in the sand. I felt the weight of isolation press down harder than before, but beneath the hurt, a new clarity emerged. That night, I confided in James, voice trembling yet resolute. "If they won't recognize me," I said, "I'll have to make them." The words tasted bitter, but true. The path ahead was no longer about quiet acceptance or gentle persuasion. It was about reclaiming what was mine by any means necessary. The family's refusal to engage had sealed their fate in this story. I was no longer the invisible daughter, the silent caretaker. I was becoming something else entirely. The quiet storm inside me had grown into a force, ready to break free. The crushing weight of rejection pressed down on me like a physical force, suffocating and relentless. After my last attempt to bridge the widening chasm with Bridget and Sarah, the family seemed to close ranks even tighter. Bridget's influence spread swiftly. Whispers turned into accusations. She painted me as a troublemaker, the black sheep stirring unnecessary drama, a narrative that my own mother silently echoed with cold, disappointed looks and clipped words. Michael, too, retreated further from me, his once cordial conversations reduced to curt text replies or outright avoidance. I called him repeatedly, my voice cracking with desperation, only to be met with silence or distracted excuses. The family I had relied on was disappearing before my eyes, replaced by a fortress built on lies and exclusion. The financial betrayal stung with a sharp, bitter edge. Bridget had maneuvered behind the scenes to freeze my access to the shared accounts, leveraging her sway over the company's bank. The sudden cutoff severed the last thread of financial security I had within the family's tangled web. I stared at the frozen statements, the harsh letters from bank officials, my heart sinking as I realized how thoroughly she had strangled my involvement. The money I had poured into the business, the countless hours I'd sacrificed drafting contracts to save them from ruin, meant nothing in the cold calculations of greed and power. Alone in my small apartment, surrounded by towering stacks of legal files and brittle family records, I felt the sting of abandonment deepen. The walls seemed to close in, the silence deafening. Sarah's coldness cut deeper than any argument or accusation. The woman who raised me, who I thought stood on my side, now served as an enabler of my erasure. Her avoidance was not just physical, but emotional, a deliberate barrier that left me stranded. I remembered her once warm hugs, now replaced with stiff, perfunctory greetings, her eyes flitting away at the slightest sign of vulnerability. That night, lying on the edge of my unmade bed, I questioned everything. Had I imagined the betrayal? Was the web of lies real, or just the cruel fabrications of my own mind? The self-doubt was a poison, seeping into my bones and clouding my judgment. But beneath the pain, a tiny ember of defiance glowed stubbornly. I was not finished. Not yet. Clutching a worn leather-bound journal, I whispered to the empty room, "I will find the truth. I will reclaim what's mine." The isolation was profound, but my resolve had begun to harden into something fierce, something unbreakable. The baby shower was supposed to be a moment of joy, a celebration of new life and the family's future. Instead, it became the crucible where everything I'd fought to hide burst into harsh sunlight. The room buzzed with chatter and laughter, but my heart pounded with dread as I stepped inside. Bridget dominated the space, her voice loud and dripping with smug satisfaction as she toasted David's newborn, weaving her speech with pointed jabs thinly disguised as congratulations. "This family's future is secure," she declared, "in the hands of those truly connected to our legacy." The words were daggers aimed squarely at me. I caught the quick, cruel smirk David flashed toward his friends as he whispered, "Rebecca's not really one of us," the venom in his tone unmistakable. The humiliation was suffocating. Eyes flicked to me with a mix of pity and disdain. My phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the tense atmosphere. A message from an unknown sender held scanned documents, the original birth certificate of my father, starkly at odds with the forged version that had disinherited me. My breath caught as I scrolled through the images, the cold certainty of betrayal crashing over me. Bridget and Sarah had conspired, fabricating legal lies to erase my claim. The room's noise dimmed into a stunned silence as I rose, holding the evidence aloft. James stood beside me, steady and resolute, while Michael's face betrayed shock and confusion. "You thought 30 years of lies would keep me away," my voice rang out, steady and fierce. "But the truth doesn't stay buried." The weight of decades shattered in that moment, exposed for all to see. Bridget's face drained of color. Sarah stiffened, their carefully constructed facade crumbling. The family I had lost was suddenly vulnerable, and so was I. Something inside me broke free, not into despair, but into cold, purposeful clarity. Retreating into the solitude of my apartment after the storm of that day, I sat surrounded by the remnants of my life's work, contracts, financial ledgers, personal notes. The silence was a balm, but also a mirror reflecting years of sacrifice and betrayal. I traced the edges of memories, unpaid loans I had made to keep the family afloat, the countless nights spent untangling legal knots while my own needs were sidelined. The anger that had simmered beneath my pain now roared to life, sharp and unyielding. This pattern of favoritism and manipulation wasn't accidental. It was a calculated campaign to suppress me. I had been the invisible servant to their greed, the quiet enabler of their lies. But the knowledge I had hidden, my legal expertise, was a weapon they hadn't anticipated. I realized then that my long silence had been their greatest mistake. The fog of confusion lifted, replaced by a fierce resolve. "Never again," I whispered into the dim room. The vow was more than words. It was a promise to reclaim my voice, my rights, my dignity. I would no longer let them silence me or exploit my loyalty. The pain that once consumed me was now fuel, igniting a fire that would burn away their falsehoods. The quiet girl who had carried the family's burdens was gone. In her place stood someone ready to fight. That night, I confided in James, my closest ally, and the one person who had never doubted me. We sat in my cluttered living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows. I laid out the plan I had been formulating, to use every ounce of my legal knowledge to challenge the forged documents, to unravel the tangled web of financial deception, to reclaim what was rightfully mine. "This isn't just about me," I said, voice steady despite the storm inside. "It's about justice. For every lie, every stolen dollar, every broken promise they've buried beneath their smiles." James listened intently, his calm presence grounding me. Together, we crafted a phased approach. First, gather irrefutable evidence to expose the forgery and financial mismanagement. Next, initiate legal actions to freeze assets and challenge improper wills. Finally, confront the family publicly with the truth they'd tried so desperately to hide. The strategy was precise, measured, not reckless vengeance but calculated justice. I felt my posture shift, shoulders straightening, eyes sharpening with purpose. No longer defensive, I was becoming strategic, ready to play the long game on a battlefield I knew intimately. James's unwavering support was a lifeline, but the drive to reclaim my place burned from within me alone. The silence that once swallowed my voice was broken, replaced by a quiet, relentless determination. The pieces were moving. The reckoning had begun. The more James and I sifted through the mountain of family business records, the clearer it became just how much Bridget and David depended on me without ever admitting it. I'd always known I was the safety net, the invisible cushion that caught their reckless moves, but the depth of their reliance was a shock. We found stacks of documents, half-signed contracts, misfiled wills, and financial transfers that seemed to disappear into thin air. Millions of dollars quietly routed through accounts tied to my father's name, untouched by legal transfer because of that forged document. It was like peeling back layers of a rotten onion. Each file revealed vulnerabilities I hadn't seen before. The properties, the shares in the family company, all still legally tethered to my father's estate, were unprotected and improperly documented. Bridget's empire was far more fragile than her brazen front suggested. In the silence of my apartment, surrounded by these dusty papers, I felt a surge of power that was equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. This was the truth they had tried to bury beneath decades of manipulation. When we consulted the estate attorney, someone James trusted implicitly, their confirmation was a green light I'd been waiting for. The forged document was not just invalid, but its existence could be challenged in court to reclaim the assets and question the legitimacy of the current leadership. My legal expertise suddenly transformed from a silent burden into a formidable weapon. Each piece of evidence was a dagger aiming right at the heart of their control. I spent nights cross-referencing birth certificates, contracts, and bank statements, piecing together a timeline that exposed the cracks in their foundation. Even Sarah's handwriting on old notes became clues to their collusion, a silent admission hidden in the margins of documents I'd long overlooked. The realization settled deep in me. They didn't just want me erased, they depended on that erasure to keep their power intact. I was the keystone holding their fragile arch of lies together, and now I held the blueprint to dismantle it all. Yet, beneath the thrill of discovery, a cold caution settled over me. This was more than just legal maneuvering. It was a battle that would reach into every corner of my life. Bridget and David had thrived on my silence. Now, armed with truth, I was no longer invisible. I would make them see me. But first, I had to prepare carefully, silently weaving the threads of my counterattack without alerting them to the storm gathering beneath the surface. Even as the family continued their charade, I moved in the shadows, quiet, deliberate. I began by securing digital and physical copies of every critical document, locking them behind layers of passwords only James and I knew. I changed access codes on shared financial accounts, quietly notifying banks of suspicious activities tied to Bridget and David's maneuvers without revealing too much. James drafted cease and desist letters, cold and professional, warning of impending legal action that would shake their empire's foundations. Every step was calculated to protect my interests, to build a fortress of evidence before the first blow landed. Emotionally, the preparation was equally intense. I started therapy sessions, private, raw moments where I could untangle the knots of betrayal without putting on a brave face. I needed to steel myself for the personal assaults I knew would come. The baby shower felt like a distant nightmare now, a painful memory I refused to let define me. Instead, I practiced measured responses, rehearsing calm replies to the inevitable provocations from Bridget and Sarah. Each family gathering became a battlefield, where silence was my weapon and composure my shield. No one suspected the quiet storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. The urgency built in the quiet hours, but my face showed none of it. I was the same Rebecca they had always dismissed, polite, reserved, seemingly resigned. But beneath that mask, I was assembling the pieces of a game they didn't know they were playing. Each document copied, each password changed, was a move on a chessboard they believed I never understood. And soon, they would learn just how wrong they were. Then came the bombshell, an encrypted cache of emails James uncovered while combing through Bridget's correspondence. At first, I thought it might be more of the usual posturing, but as James decrypted the messages, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. Bridget and Sarah had been in cahoots from the very beginning. The forged document, the silent sidelining, the smear campaigns, all orchestrated together in a secret alliance to bury me and secure David's dominance. The emails revealed covert meetings, whispered plans, financial kickbacks, a conspiracy that reached far deeper than I'd imagined. The weight of this double betrayal was suffocating. My own mother, the one person I'd trusted above all, was not just complicit, but an active architect of my erasure. I remember the moment James whispered the words that shattered the last illusions I had. "It's worse than we thought." They worked together from the start. The room spun. My breath caught in my throat. Anger, hurt, and a cold clarity surged through me. This wasn't just a family feud. It was war waged behind closed doors, with me as the unsuspecting casualty. But beneath the devastation, a fierce resolve burned brighter than ever. They had underestimated me, blinded by their arrogance. Their alliance was their greatest weakness now. This revelation gave me leverage, legal and emotional, that could dismantle their carefully constructed world. And with that knowledge came urgency. If Bridget and Sarah sensed I was close to exposing them, I knew they would strike back, desperate to cover their tracks or crush me before I could fight back. I clenched my fists, voice low but steady when I said to James, "They underestimated me. Their alliance will be their downfall." The battle lines had shifted, and I was ready to cross into enemy territory with everything I had. The first moves were deliberate and precise. I filed formal challenges to the forged documents, dragging their lies into the harsh light of the courtroom. Requests for asset freezes on family properties and company shares went out, halting transactions that once flowed freely under Bridget and David's control. Banks and stakeholders were notified, alerted to irregularities and potential fraud, putting the family's empire on shaky ground. Cease and desist letters landed on Bridget and Sarah's doorsteps, cold legal warnings that their time was running out. I cut off all personal financial support. No more quiet injections of $35,000 a year to prop up the business that had used me like a credit line. The silence from Bridget was telling. Her attempts at damage control were clumsy, her smug confidence beginning to crack. She dismissed my actions as typical legal posturing, unaware that this was just the opening salvo. David found his banking privileges suddenly restricted, documents flagged and accounts frozen without explanation. Rumors of legal trouble began to swirl through their social circles, whispers that unsettled the foundation of their power. Family gatherings became strained. Bridget's smile faltered when eyes drifted toward her with suspicion. Sarah's cold veneer showed cracks beneath polite conversations, but none of them connected the dots yet. To them, I was still the quiet, compliant daughter, unaware that the quiet withdrawal of my support and the legal maneuvers were unraveling their grip inch by inch. The game had begun, and while they remained blind to the pieces moving against them, I felt the tide turning beneath my feet. The reckoning was no longer distant. It was here, and I was ready to claim what was rightfully mine. The room was thick with tension the moment I stepped in. A gathering of family, business associates, and a few close friends circled around the polished mahogany table in the conference room of the family's law firm. The air smelled of old leather and stale coffee, a reminder that this was their turf. Until now, Bridget sat rigid at the head, her eyes darting nervously, while Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and something I recognized as guilt. Michael sat beside them, looking uneasy, caught between disbelief and dawning comprehension. I stood, clutching the thick folder that held the fruits of months of painstaking work, the forged birth certificate, financial statements revealing mismanaged funds, and emails exposing the secret collusion between Bridget and Sarah. My voice didn't waver as I laid it bare. For 30 years you erased me. For 30 years you built your empire on lies. The words echoed off the high ceilings, demanding attention. I watched Bridget's confident mask crack. She stammered, scrambling for words but none coming. Sarah's flush deepened, anger twisting her features. Michael's gaze flicked between us. Confusion and shock etched across his face. I felt the weight of every pair of eyes, some skeptical, some quietly supportive, all bearing witness as the balance of power tipped. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a reckoning. I announced the legal filings underway to reclaim my rightful inheritance, emphasizing transparency and accountability. No more financial exploitation, no more lies, no more silence. The room was electric. Supporters nodded, the skeptics faltered. This was my moment, the champagne moment, where I seized control not with anger but with unshakable calm. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst. Bridget, once untouchable, sat diminished, her empire exposed. Sarah's fury was tempered by the knowledge that her carefully nurtured facade had crumbled. I had stepped out of the shadows, and they could no longer hide behind their lies. The family, the business, everything they had built without me was suddenly vulnerable. And for the first time, so was I. Yet I felt stronger than ever. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift and brutal. Bridget's carefully woven world began to unravel like a threadbare tapestry. Business partners I once thought loyal withdrew, unwilling to be entangled in the brewing legal storm. David's name surfaced in investigations probing financial irregularities, a cloud of suspicion hanging over him that he couldn't brush away. Bridget and Sarah's desperate attempts to reach me flooded my phone. Calls filled with contrite voices begging for mercy, promising change, their words hollow and rehearsed. They sent flowers, texts layered with apologies and manufactured remorse, a campaign of love bombing meant to disarm me. I listened, yes, but I remained unmoved. My boundaries were firm, carved out of years of pain and betrayal. No more would I be the safety net for their greed. The family began to fracture under the strain. Old alliances crumbled as others distanced themselves from Bridget's toxic influence. It was painful to witness, but necessary. Michael pulled his mother aside one evening, his disappointment palpable as he confronted her privately. I caught fragments of their tense exchange, words like betrayal and disappointed, hanging heavy in the air. The parasitic in-laws, once untouchable in their arrogance, found their power severely diminished, their facade cracked beyond repair. Their empire, built on my silence and support, was now teetering on the edge of collapse. And through it all, I stood quietly resolute, no longer invisible, but a force to be reckoned with. Their desperation was a bitter reminder of the cost of their greed, and I was no longer willing to pay it. Bridget's final attempts to regain control were as predictable as they were pathetic. She unleashed a wave of flying monkeys, extended family members, business associates, anyone she could manipulate to pressure me. Guilt trips disguised as concerned calls, veiled threats of countersuits, and attempts to intimidate through social channels flooded my life. Bridget even threatened to expose personal details from my past, hoping to weaponize secrets I had long buried. Sarah, ever the enabler, fanned the flames subtly, questioning my mental stability in whispered conversations meant to sow doubt. But I was ready. James coordinated a tight legal net around me, Restraining orders, cease and desist notices, protection from harassment. I refused to engage emotionally, maintaining a calm demeanor that frustrated their efforts. Their manipulations, once so effective, now bounced harmlessly off my armor of resolve. The isolation they faced grew with each failed attempt to break me. Bridget's desperation deepened, visible in every strained smile and shaky voice during family gatherings. The empire they tried to maintain was crumbling from within, their influence slipping through their fingers. I watched from a distance, steady and unyielding, knowing each move I made tightened the noose around their lies. Their threats were empty, their tactics feeble against the fortress I had built with truth and law. They had gambled on silencing me forever, but I was a step ahead, unshakable, unbreakable, and ready to claim what was mine. Months later, standing in my new office, a space filled with light and the quiet hum of possibility, I finally felt the weight lift. The forged documents were invalidated. The family properties and business shares were legally transferred to my name. Bridget and Sarah faced ongoing legal scrutiny, their social standing diminished and their power broken. I had reclaimed more than assets. I had reclaimed my dignity and self-worth. My relationship with James deepened, built on trust forged in fire and shared triumph. Michael reached out tentatively, the first step toward healing a relationship fractured, but not beyond repair. I set clear boundaries, no longer the silent victim, but a woman who had found her voice and her strength. I hosted a small gathering, not the grand exclusionary events of the past, but a genuine family moment filled with laughter, tears, and honest connection. The baby shower that once symbolized my exclusion was replaced by a modest ceremony honoring new beginnings and accountability. In the quiet that followed, I reflected on the journey. I was the forgotten one for too long, I whispered to myself, voice steady and sure. Now, I am the author of my own story. Hope shone ahead, not as a fragile dream, but as a promise born of hard-earned justice and self-respect. I was free, not just from their lies, but from the past that had held me captive, and for the first time, the future felt truly mine.